Okay, great. So I'm so excited to be here with you today at SHRM India. I've spoken at SHRM conferences in the US. This is my first time in India. And to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, just the immigration trends and an insight into what the future will hold. You know, we've had some of the biggest changes in immigration in the last few years, changes that are really the biggest in decades in immigration that will directly impact you as employers and worldwide organizations. You know, and perhaps this was something that was predictable. Over the past few years, we've seen one of the biggest refugee crises in years that we've had, certainly in my lifetime. We've seen a lot of terror groups that have taken action, you know, events in London, Paris, and Berlin just in the last year. And many locals in countries are feeling that their jobs may be disappearing. And so this ongoing debate in countries has really exposed deep divisions among countries and within countries, within people. Certainly in the country I'm in the United States, many voters were looking for more proactive strategies from the presidential candidates, you know, and after many years of what granted was a very cerebral president, President Obama, it appears that some people were looking for somebody who was maybe more gutsy and take charge, someone who maybe made them feel more viscerally responded to. So the results of the US election are a great reflection of these multiple issues that we see in immigration. Fear of terrorism, fear of losing jobs, and it's not just in the US, the world is changing. We saw a couple years ago in Poland, there was a new government that was campaigning on xenophobic immigration agenda. And you know what's really interesting is that Poland was thriving economically. They were the 6th largest economy in Europe with very few immigrants, but somehow that message from the government resonated and appealed to the people, to the voters in that country. And over the last several decades, there's been drivers of immigration that have been considerably more pronounced in segments of the world. So to give you some perspective, over the last 10 years, the world has sustained a surge in immigration. In 2015, there were more than 244 million migrants worldwide, up from the year before of 234 in 2013, and 175 in 2000. So approximately 21 million are refugees, 50 million are irregular migrants, or meaning people that are in their countries without legal authorization. And there were about 60 million that are skills-based. Now, skills-based migration itself has increased more than 25% in the last decade. India has a long history of immigration and is both a leading source and a leading destination for migrants. To give you some interesting data, in 2015, some 15.6 million people born in India were living in other countries. And the number of international Indian migrants has more than doubled in the past 25 years. There's a large group of Indians, as you know, in the United States, UK, Canada, the Gulf countries. And in the other way, in 2015, India received almost $70 billion per year in remittances from the people that were out in all these other countries. So also, India is a great receiver of immigrants. There's about 2.5 million immigrants that live in India. It's the 12th largest immigration population in the world here in India. Now, labor immigrants are the ones that really are the ones that are sponsored by companies, that make up a significant and growing percentage of the local workforce in many countries. And around the world, many developed economies are facing a problem that they have an aging population. They don't have enough people to do the jobs. There's projected great shortages in many countries and increasing competition to be able to compete for those people that have the great skills, the best and the brightest that are educated to fill the top jobs and to draw ideas and capital from migrants. At the same time, you know, the workforce has changed dramatically. You SHRM members know well that, you know, maybe working from home is more important, or people that will not be in the office all the time. There's a lot of changes that the policymakers and the governments aren't really understanding, and the policy's not keeping up with, you know, what is actually happening in the workplace. In fact, a lot of the government rules are built on an obsolete model based on fixed work locations, structured employment, and haven't kept pace with a lot of the workplace realities. In fact, policymakers in many governments often fail to understand this new service economy. And the result is that labor market policy increasingly conflicts with what you see in local labor needs. Now, in the United States, President Trump was elected on an American First platform. It focused primarily on protecting Americans from migrants that he pictured as threatening our security and jobs. In the first 100 days that he was president, his administration addressed security, issuing executive orders on border protection, building the wall, banning certain immigrants from some countries, and increasing immigration enforcement. It's really, for anyone who's watched or been in the US, it's been a whirlwind, and it's been, for somebody engaged in immigration, quite a huge sea change. The White House has more recently turned to employment-based immigration, and looking and talking about tightening some of the criteria that people come into the United States to work on. He's directed the Department of Labor, the Department of Homeland Security, the Justice and State Department to propose changes to the way H-1Bs are selected in the H-1B lottery. In particular, he wants to know about how to allocate the numbers. Now, you probably know that H-1Bs, there's way too many H-1Bs for the 85,000 that are allocated every year. So employers file all their cases on April 1st, and there's, you know, close to 250,000 for the last few years that have applied for the 85,000 slots. The way that the government will allocate those visas is just a random lottery. And it's been very difficult for employers to predict who's going to win that lottery. And it's really a dumb way to be able to enforce, to have immigration policy. So our administration is currently looking at different ways to allocate that. But what they're focusing on is higher wages. The higher wages you have, the higher you'll be in the lottery. Higher skilled, the higher skilled you'll have will be higher in the lottery. And we see that that may eliminate a lot of the entry level or college, just basic college educated people. The president's also ordered tougher enforcement laws against H-1B violation and abuse. And during the opening week of the HCAP filing season, there were 3 government agencies that issued coordinated announcements about greater collaboration, investigations for abusers, renewed focus on employers who place H-1Bs on work sites of employers. And that's definitely one of the big areas that they're looking at. The president has voiced some support for skilled immigration. In fact, I think today, there was an article in the Times of India that talked about how the H-1Bs have continued to be issued as normal, and there hasn't been a lot of disruption. What we're looking to see is what will happen over the next few months in preparation for the new HCAP. He's looking at giving more merit, skill, and proficiency more weight in the cap. Also, his Buy American, Hire American executive order will prioritize the most highly skilled and highly compensated people, potentially to replace the lottery system. So what do we see really happening? Well, there's probably 5 things that you need to look out for in changes to U.S. immigration law. One would be limiting and even eliminating work authorization for entry-level jobs. This is something the U.S. did recently when it's issued a new memo saying computer programmers who had been considered H-1B visa eligible will now maybe not be high enough. They'll be a little bit lower. And this is not limited to the United States. We'll touch on that for just a minute. Also, raising wage requirements for sponsored employees, requiring that employers pay maybe 125% of the prevailing wage, not just 100% of prevailing wage. Also, more labor market tests are probably in order. And this is not just in the United States. We've seen this happen, for example, in Canada. They're doing this. The wage level in the UK. And then closer scrutiny of employees who are placed on client premises. There is clearly an all-out attack on companies who place people on job sites. The view is that it must be taking jobs away from local workers if you're placing your H-1B or L-1, your non-immigrant employees on the site of another client. And then finally, increase government investigations on employer work sites. Now, we saw something similar with Brexit in the UK, that there was a lot of concern about the foreigners who were in the UK. In fact, just prior to the Brexit vote, though really Britain had only accepted a small number of the refugees in Europe, there was a tabloid that implied the country was being run over, the words like swarming with immigrants or tide of foreigners, and that influenced the Brexit vote in the UK. Now, Brexit is not going to immediately impact other groups of people like Indian workers. The UK Brexit vote really applies to other people from the EU, but it is one indication that countries and voters are really voting anti-immigration. Australia, something recently happened similar, where the reduction of 457 professional visa, the types of visas that were issued with that, and proposed changes to citizenship rule in Australia. So what can you do? What can you expect? I really think that as SHRM members and part of an organization as influential as SHRM and from many of your employers, really HR professionals have a duty to help their companies speak up to governments, help governments recognize the key benefit and competitive advantage of talent around the world. A lot of the things we've heard over the last 2 days have to do with talent, and really being able to use talent globally is such an asset, not only to companies like yourselves, but also to governments, to countries. There is a shortage, and helping people understand that most of these skilled migrants that come actually help increase productivity in countries and actually play an important role in building many companies. So with that, thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions about immigration.